Hi, it's Lippy. I'm a shamanic healer, and in today's video, I am going to talk about how abusers use this one particular tactic to make you stay in a helpless, powerless state. And I'm not sure what category this tactic comes under. So, is it gaslighting? Is it manipulation? Is it a put down? I think it's a little bit of all three, but the name that I have given it is, I call it stealing your sense of justice. So let me explain. Now, many of you may have had this experience. I certainly have had this experience where I've had people who are either doing something abusive to me or being abusive to another turn around, and when you confront them with what they've said or confront them with their behavior, they will turn around and say something like, well, life isn't always fair, so deal with it, and you don't always get what you want in life, and you know what's the point of protesting against XYZ because it's never going to change anyway. And in my experience, I have seen this over a span of, well, I don't know how many, more than 20, 30 years. And I have seen that this is every abuser that I have met, every every narcissist, every misogynist, every racist person that I've met. It's almost strange because it's almost like you feel like asking them, like, do you guys know each other? Because they all say the same thing, and this is what they say. And when they make statements like this, it can make the person at the receiving end of this statement feel really helpless and feel like, oh my God, there's probably no hope, and maybe they're right, and I shouldn't bother, uh, protesting against this or that. But in this video, I'd like to tell you what I have figured out, why they say this, and why it is a complete load of basically BS, and how you can empower yourself by looking at the real intention behind their words, and then doing whatever you need to do to make a positive change in your life, because their whole intention of saying this is to prevent you from making a positive change. Now, before I explain this tactic in more detail, let's go into a little bit of a gray area, and that is to try to understand whether life is fair or unfair, because this is what is said by many abusers, and it's also believed by many people who either enable abuse or are victims of abuse themselves. They really feel that life is unfair. So let's investigate this a little bit, and let's try to understand, is life, to answer this question, is life fair or is life unfair? So many of us have had this experience where life can be unpredictable, and things don't always go our way, and there are many times when we start off with the best of intentions and we really put our heart and soul into something, and things don't work out, and when this happens, obviously we are inclined to look at life and say, well, life is so unfair. But how does life become unfair? In my observation, when I observe the unfairness of life, I see that a majority of the unfairness of life actually comes from human behavior. So if I look at the baser traits of us, of humans, the less evolved traits, or whatever you want to call them, for example, greed and selfishness and apathy and arrogance, complete disregard for others, lack of empathy for what someone else may be going through, these are the baser traits that are usually behind the unfairness of life. So if I look at that, is it life that's unfair, or is it us that's unfair? It's us that choose unfair behaviors, and people with vested interests choose unfair behaviors, and therefore life then becomes unfair for the person at the receiving end of this behavior. And this is largely the way I view the process of unfairness. But it still doesn't account for things like natural disasters. So, what about somebody who loses their one and only home in a flood? Or what about someone who's seriously injured in an earthquake? I mean, that isn't very fair to them, arguably or not. And what about that? What does that have to directly do with human behavior? So if I say that it's all human behavior that makes life unfair, well, there's also elements of the way life and nature are sometimes, and that needs to be accounted for as well. So the other question that then comes to mind is, well, okay, so sometimes you have these things that happen are naturally occurring, they have less to do with humans, and you know even in the case of humans being unfair, who made humans? Who created humans? Obviously humans were created by nature or by the universe or pure consciousness or whatever you want to call it. So then that argument can go on and on and on. And I don't know about you, but that kind of argument makes me go like, whoa, in my head. It's a pretty crazy argument, and I don't think there is any concrete answer to it. However, I also know that we are much more than just our baser nature. So, okay, if we keep aside the unfairness of elements out of our control, if we keep that aside, there is a lot of unfairness that can be eliminated if we just make better choices, if we are able to overcome our baser natures, and that is very much in the hands of humans. Maybe not everyone can change. I'm not going to sit here and be blanket this kind of statement all over everybody, because I know that not everyone can change, but there are many that can. And when we make that kind of an effort, then yes, we can make life a lot more fair than it currently is. So the first thing that I think about when I hear a statement like this, when abusers will turn around and say to you that, well, life is unfair, and things are not going to change. When I hear those kind of statements, the first thing that gets into my head is, well, why not? Why not? What do you mean things can't change? Of course they can change. And yes, there may be a lot of unfairness around, but that doesn't mean we have to keep tolerating the fairness that we can change. Now, I have heard these statements, this kind of statement about life being unfair, being used as an abuse tactic all my life. I've had a personal experience of this. I've also had vicarious experience of this. I see it all over social media, for instance. When I log on to Facebook, I will sometimes have posts from certain feminist websites, because, well, I'm a feminist and I subscribe to a lot of feminist websites, and I'll constantly notice that there may be a post that is discussing a possible solution or even having a rant to an injustice, and you'll always have these trolls who will make the same statement in different, they'll just use different words, they'll make the little word salad and turn things around, but it'll boil down to the same thing. They're basically saying life is unfair, deal with it. If you don't have equality, too bad, you're never going to have equality. I also have had this experience in my own life. Now, I had this friend. He was someone I was very close to at one point of time, and I now realize that he is probably a malignant narcissist. And he also had a huge amount of megalomania. So this friend of mine, I felt that something was off with him even then, but it's only now that I realize the full magnanimity, I don't know if I got that word right, of his behavior. And he would commonly say this. He would actually sit me down and tell me how he felt that equality was bullshit. And I'm not just talking about gender equality, I'm talking about class equality, I'm talking about race, I'm talking about, anything in life where one person, any event or situation in life where one person or a group of people are put in a position of advantage and power, usually by sucking on the energy and taking away the power from another group of people, however it's done, whether it's done by a gender, or whether it's done by a race, is not the point here. And he would say this to me. He was like, this equality thing is bullshit, because life isn't fair, and get used to it. It's the clever and the smart, like you and me. He would say, you and me lives, people like us, we're the ones who get ahead in life. We're smart, we're superior to everyone, don't you see that? And stuff like that. And even then, I didn't even know what narcissism was. Even then, I used to look at him like, okay, that is like, okay dude, you're really delusional. But I have seen this kind of thing repeated again and again by several other people in my life. So just a few months back, I was in Goa and met up with a friend at one of the shacks near my little beach guest house. And she brought a friend along to dinner. And unfortunately, the dinner conversation turned into a pretty heated debate about women's equality. And this guy that she had brought along with her, he turned around and he says to me finally, towards the end of our conversation, and he said, it's no point having these arguments. It's no point for women to fight for equal rights, because it's never going to change. Life isn't fair, and we just have to deal with that. It's never going to change. And I was livid. I was so angry at this man. I was angry at his arrogance. I was also angry at his ignorance, because in my mind I'm thinking, well, dude, if things haven't changed, then how are you carrying a cell phone? Tell me that. If change is never possible in life, if there's no such thing as change, so things are never going to change, how are you carrying a cell phone? How did you get here? How did you drive? They were staying in another beach resort some 15-20 kilometers away from where I was. Like, how did you drive here in a span of 20 minutes? Because just 200 years ago, this would have been impossible. You would not be able to call. You can use a cell phone and call somebody 3,000 miles away and speak to them in a matter of seconds. Just 200 years ago, there was no way that was possible. And suddenly I realized something. It was almost like this tube light went off in my head, and I was like, okay, wait a minute. All these abusers, they say the same thing. As I said earlier, it's almost like, are they related? Like, do they know each other, or do they have some kind of group or something? And I realized that the reason they make this statement, because this statement, it makes no logical sense. It's a complete load of BS. In fact, I'm going to go as far as to say it's like a whole load of bullshit. Is because they don't want things to change. They want things to stay the same. They want to say these things to you to steal your power, so that you remain feeling low and helpless, and especially if you're in an abuse situation and you've already been abused for a certain length of time, and you're already there at the bottom of the pit and you're already down in the dumps. This statement is specifically used to make sure you stay in that dump, because in that dump, in that helpless state, you are a perfect source of energy for them, a supply for them. So whether it's a narcissist or a psychopath or someone who's misogynist or racist, the language is the same. And that's the only intention behind it. It's not because it's true. It's because they want it to be true so they can maintain their false sense of power over people. Now, I just want to share with you a very recent experience I've had over the last few months where I had this beautiful channeled prayer that came to me about the nature of pure consciousness. And it's a prayer that was given to me solely for my use. So I don't feel ready to share the whole prayer with everyone at this point. But I tell you that one aspect of the prayer was it talked about how the universe is just. And I have to be honest with you, I am still investigating further into that sentence because I have a lot of questions there because I see so much injustice around me. And as someone who hates injustice, I do sometimes wonder, is the universe just? And I have been abused, and I've heard this statement from several abusers over the years, and I know they stole my sense of justice, and I'm trying to get it back now. But the investigation that I've done so far, I was thinking about it, and I was like, it's very interesting because if you think about it, okay, there's a lot of unfairness in life. No one is going to argue with that. But there is also a provision for justice in the universe. And regardless of how deep I've gone into this topic, I know I need to go in there deeper. I can see that provision. It's there in many religious traditions. It's there in many spiritual traditions. And I see it even in my shamanic practice. So I've been exploring Hawaiian shamanism a little bit. I don't claim to know everything about Hawaiian shamanism, but I know a little bit. And one of the most beautiful practices in Hawaiian shamanism is called Ho'oponopo. I always sometimes get confused with the pronunciation. Okay, so it's Ho'oponopono. I think I got the pronunciation right the second time. And the meaning of Ho'oponopono is simply this. It simply means to correct, to make right, to make what has gone wrong, or make an injustice of what has gone wrong, make it right, regardless of how you make it right. Because when you do the prayer, you will be aligned with how to make things right. I at one point of time was practicing Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism, and they have this beautiful lotus sutra that they chant, and it's called Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. And even Nam Myoho Renge Kyo is something you chant to grow yourself, to improve on your baser nature, to reveal your Buddhahood, and also to align yourself with the goodness of life. And what is that? What is that for? It is a form of justice, because you are trying to take what is wrong, what is dark, what is unfair, what is evil even, and make that right. And even the Christian tradition, or any tradition for that matter, of prayer, just simple prayer, forget about anything very fancy. What is prayer really? What is it? Why do we have prayer? Prayer is also this. When we are praying, we're not just praying for, say, material success, or for our health to get better, or for a relationship, or for a loved one to prosper. We are saying that prayer because something has gone wrong in that area, or something isn't fair or right in that area, and we are praying to correct that situation, to make it right. So if we have fallen into hard times, we are praying for prosperity. And what is that? Indirectly, what is that but an ask or a call for justice? To, okay, so this happened, this was unfair. I'm not going to get into the debate of why it was unfair, but let's make it fair, let's make it right. So let's make this better. And now, yes, you can get into many debates about, well, not all prayers are answered, and this can go on, and there may be a variety of reasons why that happens, and I'm not arguing that. But If justice didn't exist in the universe, it wouldn't be part of our spiritual tradition or our religious tradition. It's there in every spiritual and religious tradition that I have come across or I have experienced. So when somebody is saying to you that life is unfair and this is the way it is and it's not going to change, they are really stealing your sense of justice, because they are preventing you, either directly or indirectly, from going out there and trying to make a change. And they're also making a very poor excuse for human frailties and human behavior. Now, I'm not saying that we should strive to be perfect. We have our limitations as human beings. I respect that. That's fine. But we're so much more than our limitations. And when someone steals your sense of justice, it also creates a very poor standard, not only for you, but also for them, because it absolves them of the responsibility of overcoming their basal nature, of overcoming the things that make life unfair, because that is always a possibility. I'm not saying it's always done perfectly or it works out perfectly, but it's always there as a possibility, and we need to exercise that possibility. So I'm going to leave you with the idea, or with an advice, if I may call it that the next time you are in a situation where someone is being abusive, and when you confront them with their behavior, they throw this at you. They say that, well, too bad, tough luck, get used to it. Remember that they're doing that as a cover-up for their own insecurity, because they're really, really scared for anyone to become empowered, for anyone to harness the justice that is there in the universe, because that would basically make them, or they believe that it would make them lose their power. And I'd also like to share with you that anyone in this world who's ever made a change, you look at Mahatma Gandhi. I'm Indian, and we just celebrated our Independence Day a few days back, and I'm amazed at how this tiny little frail man stood in his power and actually brought an entire empire down and brought freedom to this country. I look at Martin Luther King and the kind of fight he put up to get more rights for African Americans in the US, and how that movement also spilled over to many parts of the world, and how Abe Lincoln fought to end slavery. And these are all examples. These are all very inspiring true life examples. This really happened, of people who refuse to take an injustice lying down, who refuse to surrender to the status quo and say, well, this is how things always are. They got up and they did something about it, and it changed. I'm not saying the change is perfect, because that's another thing the abusers will tell you. Well, it changed, but still, can a woman walk safely in the night? Can an African man get a job as easily as, say, a white man? Yeah, okay. So we have room for improvement. I'm not gonna argue that. Injustice, racism, sexism still happens. However, if change is not possible, how are women voting today? How is an African American, for example, riding in the same bus as a white person, where just, I don't know, I'm bad with history dates, but I suspect just about maybe 70 odd years ago, in some states in the US, it was actually illegal for a white person and a black person to sit together. They were not allowed to share the same area, bus seats, particular restaurants, etc., etc. So if things don't change, then how did that change? I'd just like you to think about that. And please don't allow anyone ever to disempower you or to steal your sense of making things right by abusing you in this way. I thank you for listening. I would really love to hear your comments about this video. Any suggestions, any questions that you may have are also welcome. Any constructive feedback would be great. And I look forward to seeing you again soon next time. Thank you. Goodbye.